let's talk about Roger's first proposition, Suzanne.
Right. Okay, then. Hi, everybody. It's really lovely to be here. And thank you for asking me to take part in this, Ross. It's really nice to see people from my diploma, but also some people that I haven't seen for a while. So I see you, Sarah. So it's lovely to see. Yeah, Roger's first proposition. I don't know very much about it. I think it's a bit of a head scratcher. And the reason I suppose this session came about was because in my final statement for my diploma, one of the things I said, and I will read it to you, was I remember sitting in the big room at Com40, which is where we do the training, hearing them talking about the propositions and really listening to it and getting stuck into each one of them. And it was this idea that every individual exists in a continually changing world of experience of which he is the center. And I had a real physical reaction to it. The idea, and I've written it here, the idea that an infant might feel that is completely alien to me, and I can't imagine it. And I wonder whether proposition one really is the case for everyone, or if there are degrees to which it is experienced. And so Ross, when he was designing this series, suggested that this might be quite an interesting topic to discuss. And so I've spent quite a lot of time since then really reflecting on the first proposition and what it means for clients, and particularly people who've experienced extreme distress. And yeah, I find it interesting because it feels like a bit of a doorway to the universe and the meaning of life, but it's sort of not spoken about in Roger's. So I say this from having not read everything Roger's ever written, but it feels like he was kind of skating over something that was enormous. And even in the text that comes after the phrase at the top, the proposition as it's stated, for me, it doesn't capture some of the real uncertainty that sits around it. And I found myself I was saying to Ross, I found myself longing to be able to write an essay about this because it feels really complicated, and the ideas around it are kind of like mercury. They're fleeting and they won't settle, So I find myself thinking about the meaning of life and what the center really is, and can there be a center, and can you be a center? So these are the kinds of things that have been in my mind. And I think one of the most profound things for me was because somehow it was about the individual being at the center of their experience rather than being the center of their experience. And that is such a fundamental shift when you think about it, from those two perspectives. Suddenly it's about, I was saying again to Ross, it's a bit like you're either if you're at the center, you're kind of the stone in the avocado or the hub of a wheel, and everything's happening to you, or there's a kind of transaction in terms of how you interact with reality and experience. But if you are the center of it, then all of a sudden that becomes something completely different, and there aren't edges, and you're connected to things in a much more fundamental way, and it takes you into the realms of energy. And then I started watching Brian Cox videos because I feel like there are parallels in terms of what's happening to us internally and consciousness and how we perceive the reality that we sit in and how we experience it. And some of the discussions that seem to be happening in the world of cosmology and how people are thinking about the universe and how it's expanding and how well we can know it or not know it, and where our place is within it. And to me, there's just some really interesting and slightly uncomfortable parallels there, because once you start thinking about it, it's like you're in the vacuum of space. Anyway, that's my first thing. I don't know if I should just carry on with this like verbal diarrhea, but...
Well, I mean, I think, Suzanne, you've said, such a lot there about it. And I guess as I was listening to you, I was thinking, what you've managed to kind of tease out just by kind of a bit of closer inspection, stimulated by your own curiosity around it, and how actually the difference between what you're doing with it and how it's taught and how we teach it and how it's kind of almost being traditionally looked at within the literature is kind of a general acceptance of it at face value in a way, in the sense that it's generally understood that Rogers is talking about, or he's directing towards the notion of phenomenology, in that, we are kind of accepting of the experience as reality, essentially. And I think that's the main kind of thrust of how we understand it and how we've traditionally looked upon it. And I guess that's a functional way to look at it, because it's foundational for the rest of the propositions to sit on. I mean, if that has to be there so that essentially the rest of it makes sense, because they follow on directly from there. But actually what you're doing is like looking at it from a much deeper perspective, and so much more that even that you say the changing of one word in the sentence changes the meaning entirely. And I would agree with that. So it's fascinating to think about. As you get into cosmology and thinking about the universe and stuff like that, I'm kind of reminded of what Rogers does later on, actually, with the formative tendency, which is essentially extension of the actualizing tendency out into the kind of universal stuff. And it kind of feels very much in alignment with that, with what you're saying.
I'm not really familiar with that at all, like in terms of how he extends it and what like how does it sort of connect for you?
Well, I think just the sort of the cosmological aspect of it. I think my understanding of that, when he extends it out, and I think he kind of overstretches himself, to be honest, because I think he's kind of taking the actualizing tendency and apply that to the universe in a way you can see it happening there. And I guess, well, again, at face value, that makes sense in a way, and it's hard to argue with it until you, I suppose, become an astrophysicist or something, which he wasn't. So I'm not sure, but it kind of feels almost like within this proposition or the examination, we're in similar territory.
I think this is where it's almost like finding the essence. It sort of gets to the essence of life, but he's not really saying that. But the next thing that I guess connected to this was I was thinking about how my reaction to it when I'd first heard it, and thinking about it now, it's like the individual is the center of their reality or their experience. And on one level, that's true. Objectively, of course, that's true, sort of. But subjectively, I think that's an entirely different thing. And so I think there's an assumption in there that a person, even an infant, is in a situation where their experience is prime and it's not subsumed or overshadowed or replaced by another's. And I don't know if that's a thing, whether that even happens, but it struck me that there is something about how that there is an assumption that that's just reality, that's just how it is. And I don't think that it is. I don't know how I would necessarily be able to prove it, but it feels like it might only be partially true, perhaps, because I know it goes into the second proposition where he's talking about reality, responding to reality as perceived. And maybe it's just that you're perceiving somebody else's reality because it slips in so quickly that you never actually get to know what your experience is. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I think you're in the territory of essentially what he talks about in conditionality. I think this kind of imprinting of another's reality upon yours is, or even an overwriting of actually conditions, conditionality.
Yeah. So and maybe it just is that it happens so quickly that it's there from the moment, that the person never really gets, or the infant or whoever it happens to be, never really gets the chance to realize that they're the center of their experience. Or because there's something, and then that, I think, perhaps then gets into whether they know they exist. Because there's something about you only know you exist in relation to another person, and it all just feels like it's mixed in there. Maybe it is all the conditions and everything, but it's just all mixed in there.
Well, yeah, I guess what you're doing there is separating out the academic from the reality, which is that actually kind of, what's that phrase, everything all at once kind of thing. It all happens. It's not like there's a period of time where, oh, I'm the center of reality and this is wonderful, and then somebody comes along and starts adding stuff you perceive to have come from you. I think it's probably there right from the minute you arrive, and isn't it? So there's a layering, and so what that does when we tease that out, it makes me wonder about this concept of the true self, or where that is ever to be found, if there is such a thing, even in that regard. But that's an academic point.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because if a person hasn't had that experience of just that kind of innate experience of being the center, I'm using experience a lot now, but being the center of their experience, then I wonder, and this made me think about clients, if that's the case, then moving towards an acknowledgement and an embodiment of actually being at the center of your experience can, I imagine, be really terrifying, because it's almost like there has to be a leap of faith in there, I think, to sort of let go of one reality that has been the kind of the backdrop into something else that might be completely different. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but
it makes sense to me. I find myself thinking, I suppose, along practical lines of that, and it takes me into kind of, I suppose, what it might look like in a therapeutic relationship, in that a client is emerging into some awareness of their agency in life in a way in which has previously not been conscious, or has been shut down or suppressed. And that's a frightening thing. But to actually, I think of yourself at the center of all reality is something which is even hard to how do we ever perceive of that? How do we ever get to a point? I'm not sure that's a thing. I'm not sure people do. In fact, I was just thinking about my own conditionality and growing up, and distinctly remembering my mother telling me that I wasn't the center of everything. And that seems to be the story that people are. There's a kind of don't that kind of culture of not thinking too much of yourself, or that kind of thing, which is directly contrasting what we're trying to get to here. Being taught not to think of yourself in that way. Not everything revolves around you.
Yeah. So you must have to find your way back to the reality that it really does on a fundamental level. It has to. That's just how it is. Is that what you mean?
Well, I think I'm talking about a couple of things. I'm talking about what sort of broadening out the point we were making earlier, which is, do we ever really are we ever in a situation where we have a conscious awareness of being at the center of everything? And it's very likely that very early introjections are taking us away from that anyway. And so early that we have no way of, I guess, getting back there. I mean, they're so early and so young.
Do you think there's ever a possibility of getting back to it in later life?
I mean, it depends on I suppose it depends on what age we're talking about. I mean, if we're talking about infants, then it's how aware of self. Because I think we need to be at the point of self-awareness, which I think Rogers begins to talk about, I think, in the fourth proposition, that a part of the experience of reality becomes identifiable as the self. I think there's the point at which we begin to be aware of what, potentially, and I think this is an academic point anyway as well, that potentially we can go, well, this is me, and this was something that you introjected into my self.
Yeah. So it's almost like you can't ever go back to the purity of whatever it was when you were like freshly hatched.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can think of a way back there.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. But what would that look like? I mean, what does it look like? Does it ever look like, well, I'm existing in a continually changing world of experience in which I'm the center? Seems like quite a leap. It seems quite a leap to even, to hold
the thought that could be possible, do you mean?
that this is what's happening. This is, and I think to be fair to Rogers in a way, I mean, he's in the stuff that he does write under this proposition, he's talking about there's only quite a small percentage of the experiences that actually happen that we symbolize into awareness. So, which is an interesting concept, isn't it? So it's like we talk about, we talk about babies being sponges and they soak everything in. And I guess Rogers is saying that it is going in, but there's only a small part of that which actually is something which is held within the immediate consciousness or symbolized, as he would use his terminology. But he is saying that it's kind of almost like the rest of it goes into the perceptual field. So it's there, but it's not being used. But it can be called upon under certain circumstances. And I think my understanding of what he's saying about is that that's kind of need-based. So they're there if needed. Well, what stimulates that? The circumstances. And I guess you could interpret that as well under what he's saying about the conditions, is that maybe the right therapeutic conditions could produce that.
Yeah.
And that would then sort of be a way back, maybe.
But I suppose in a way it's a bit like you'd never get yourself back in your baby body. It would take a lot to get to that, in that some of it would just be utterly impossible. Yeah. Interesting. I'm really distracted by the fact that the light is starting to fade, and I guess the eclipse must be well underway.
So in this as well, Rogers borrows an idea from Angyal, and in client-centered therapy, he says, consciousness is the symbolization of our experiences. So that kind of takes us back into this whole idea of what consciousness is, and that is made up of, or it is equal to, the symbolization of experience. Therefore, that, like what I was saying earlier, is that the bits that, and I'm not sure what determines which bits we retain at the conscious level and which bits are allowed to I guess, sink to the bottom somewhere. What the deciding factors in that, I think that's an interesting question, and how he got to that thinking around it. But nonetheless, he is citing that as consciousness itself. So I guess I symbolize, therefore I am, or something like that,
Yeah, I wonder how that then fits with the idea of knowing whether a person knows they exist or not. Because there's something about, I wonder, and this was something else as I was thinking about this, is if you don't have another person, something to be in relationship with, how do you know that you exist? It's a bit like the tree in a forest. And I wonder, does that mean then that I don't know, I just wonder whether, again, thinking about like an infinite experience, like, and if to what extent it just made me wonder about the influence of being met, because and to what degree, what would need to, I don't think I want to know what would need to happen, but to what degree that interaction, that relationship then allows the other to know that they exist. And then it becomes about, because that does go back to being the center of your experience, because you need to also know that you exist. But I don't know that you can know that you exist without being in relationship with another, like formative, like at an early age, not necessarily now.
So a couple of things happening to me as I listen to that about what you're saying. One of them is that I think you begin to get into what is psychological contact, actually, because, which is interestingly another first on a list of things that Roger says are important. And again, very little written about. So, but there's a real bridge there, I think, in what you're saying, what it does to the other to be in psychological contact. The other thing takes us back into the more kind of cosmic stuff we were talking about earlier, which is what happens to subatomic particles when they are being observed. They change. And I guess that's the territory that you were kind of traversing there with that. What constitutes existence or being, and it can only be, I think, from my perspective, and I think Rogers assumes this maybe as well, it's another assumption perhaps that he might be making, is that this is all done in relationship. It has to be done in relationship to the other. Otherwise, it doesn't, how can it exist in a way?
Yeah. But I think that relationship then becomes really important and powerful. And I mean, I guess it always was, but it just, there is something I don't think I'd realized until I started thinking about this proposition. The degree to which that might set things in motion for potentially really significant disturbance because of all these kind of underpinning things that we take for granted not necessarily being there. And again, maybe everybody knows that and I'm just coming to the party late, but it just feels, again, it feels really important to sort of have that in mind, I guess, to think about this stuff. Does that make sense?
I think it's great to think about it because, I mean, you know, what I mean, it kind of takes us back for me to the sort of one of the earlier points is that I think we kind of overlook the depth of this in a way, and we treat it, I think, as a foundation block for the other propositions, which, you know, and have more written about them, more to kind of get into. It's a bit like, yeah, it's taken for granted in a way, and that actually there's much more to it than first meets the eye in terms of what is really intended by Rogers in the concepts that he's introducing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I wish he was here. I would really like to have a conversation with him because he's got a lot of questions he needs to answer. Yeah, feels bigger than I'd expected. And
well, it makes me wonder because I've been, I guess, telling people for years, because it's my understanding and how I teach and have done for a long time, is that Rogers kind of got more into, let's call it, the kind of cosmic stuff as he got older. But I'm beginning to wonder, and because, you know, the rationale was that he when he's writing client-centered therapy, he's got a point to prove, you know, breaking new ground, and he's being diligently academic and wordy and quite scientific in the way he presents things. But again, I'm beginning to look at this discussion stimulating thoughts about, you know, that was kind of already there in a way, because this proposition is in itself, you know, dealing with deep concepts like consciousness and that kind of thing, which are not easily explainable.
yeah, and I guess, and when Rogers was writing, the science was still, I mean, I can't remember when Einstein came up with his theory of relativity, but that's all in the mix for this too. And our understanding, I guess, of neuroscience and all that, and the cosmos has developed quite a lot since Rogers' time. And yet there's a real ancientness as well to the first proposition. It's not just the whizzy science, it's also kind of the fun, it gets into some of the spiritual aspects of being a person and life, and it's all in that as well. It takes you to all sorts of other things.
That's interesting, because I kind of agree with you, but I wonder then, are we saying that in order to kind of embrace this first proposition, you have to look at it through a spiritual lens?
No, I don't think so, because I don't think you have to embrace it. You have to look at it through a astrophysics lens either. I think in some ways it feels like a very personal thing, and I wonder if it's a different shape for every single person here tonight. We understand it differently. The center is different for each of us. How we experience, like when I think about being the center of my experience and my world of experience, I kind of imagine like a really chewy pot of like golden syrup or something, but I'm part of it. I'm not. Do you know what I mean? It's like just this moving kind of thing. But I don't suppose that's, well, maybe other people feel like that too, but I imagine that everybody has their own kind of conception.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that it's how lovely your fluid, your process is. If you're kind of syrupy, it means you've got a lovely fluid process. There's no rigidity there. But okay, so what is that then? So what is the?
I think, oh gosh, I'm talking about stuff I don't really know anything about, but it feels like that's the kind of energetic stuff. and again, it comes back to physics for me, weirdly, isn't it? So, but it's interesting because I remember in the diploma, one of the things where it was about that kind of awareness and presence, and just you could feel it, like when I can't remember, the exercise where you sort of bring your hands up and you can almost feel the other person's presence. I think there's something of that in it, and yeah, I don't know if other people did that kind of where you can sort of sense sort of looking at my diploma buddies, and yeah, but there's something about that, I think, and again, it's something that you only really experience with another being. I don't think it necessarily has to be a human, but I don't know. I feel like I might be clinging to the edge of my beer mat now, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we'll probably very soon open up to people, and if anyone's got questions and you're going to be, we're going to, for those that join late, there's a space to ask questions in the sort of second half of this, but also feel free to put stuff in the chat as well if you want us to pick them up and read them out. Yeah, I'm interested. So I guess a question for you, because I think the distinction you made earlier about your words, recall exactly, but the difference between being at the center of your experience or in the center of your experience.
So being at the center or being the center.
Being the center. So which are you?
Good question. I'm going to say the second one. But I think actually I do feel like I'm the second, more of the second, because the first one, the being at the center, for me, there's a power and linearity that goes with that I don't really identify with. I think there's something much more real for me about it being the center. And I think it then takes in everything, but it also adds this layer of complexity, doesn't even get close to it. It's like fluid dynamics. It's just, there's something really, it's not like a simple transaction with the world. It's much more mysterious and nonlinear. I'm a scientist by background, so and it just feels more like it's in that space. That you can't necessarily predict the outcome of something, that a small change here will have a massive change over here. It's just, but it's controllable, but only up to a point. Whereas I think being at the center kind of belies the complexity of things. For me, it might be different for others. But
okay, because at the center suggests that there's something external going on around you.
Yeah, I think it does, and it feels like this. It feels like it communicates a sense of control that I don't think is there, and it's a very, it feels like quite a reductive way of thinking about it. Whereas, because I think of it as a hub with a wheel with spokes, like a bicycle wheel, and whereas being out the center, it's more like a tin of golden syrup, but being part of the golden syrup.
Okay, gosh, yeah.
I might think something different tomorrow, though. Just
that's the thing with this stuff, isn't it? And that's what these conversations are great at, is making us think a bit deeper about some of the stuff that we do, that are foundational to our philosophical approach. And I think I touched on this earlier a little bit as well. But what does all this look like in the therapy space? Does it even kind of exist there in a way?
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier, and the word that just came to mind was just the need to be tender, because it feels like a really precious space and something that especially for clients who've experienced something really, I don't know what the word is, just awful. And there's something about just being able to hold that space for them and hold them in a very tender way, as if they are firstborn. There's just something really vulnerable, I think, about it, without wanting to sort of take any power away from them. But there's just something about tenderness being really important working on that.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of what we have spoken about is really valuable in terms of our understanding of theoretical concepts and stuff. But I find, like, if I was thinking about any of this in the therapy space, I would be so distracted that I don't think I would be any purpose. But I like what you said there about the tenderness of and I think also that there's something of how realistically close we can get to understanding the experience of it.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Which I think is useful.
Yeah.